Remember when we convinced him the vasectomy worked? All 3 are yours, Mike. And now he's footing the bill for this $1 million wedding. I stood frozen, my hand clutching the doorframe like it was the only thing holding me upright. The laughter hit me like a punch to the gut, echoing from the corner of the room where Sarah, my wife of 18 years, stood huddled with Mike, my best friend, and all 3 of my kids. My daughter Emily, the bride, wiped away tears of laughter, while her brothers Ryan and Jake leaned in, their grins wide as if they'd just heard the funniest joke in the world. Sarah, still laughing, added the final twist of the knife. "Poor Paul," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "He actually thinks he's the head of this family." The air was sucked out of my lungs. My entire world, my marriage, my family, my identity, had been obliterated in a single moment. I wanted to yell, to scream, to demand answers, but all I could do was stand there, paralyzed, as the truth crashed over me. I didn't realize I had stepped into the room until the sound of my shoes on the polished floor silenced their laughter. The smiles vanished. Emily's face went pale, Jake and Ryan straightened like soldiers caught slacking, and Sarah had the audacity to raise an eyebrow as if I was the one intruding. "What's wrong, Paul?" she asked, her voice saccharine, masking the venom underneath. "You look like you've seen a ghost." It took everything in me to keep my voice steady. "Funny, Sarah. I was just wondering, is this how you plan to celebrate today? Laughing about the fact that my entire life has been a lie?" Sarah's smirk wavered for a split second, but then it returned, sharper than before. "What are you talking about, Paul?" she said, feigning innocence, her tone almost mocking. Mike stood beside her, his face frozen in a look of shock or guilt. I couldn't tell, and at that moment, I didn't care. All I knew was that I was staring at a woman who had lived in my home, shared my bed, and now I realized had lied to me every single day for nearly 2 decades. The silence in the room stretched, suffocating, as all eyes turned toward us. My voice, low and cold, cut through the tension. "Don't play dumb, Sarah. I heard everything. About the vasectomy, about the kids, about Mike." My gaze shifted to him, my so-called best friend, who had the decency to look away. "Do you want to explain, or should I?" Her laugh was light, dismissive, like I had accused her of stealing the last slice of cake. "Paul, you're being ridiculous. You must have misheard something." "Misheard?" My voice rose, shaking now as the fury I had been holding back surged to the surface. "Misheard? Don't insult my intelligence, Sarah. You just admitted that these kids, our kids, aren't even mine. That you've been lying to me, using me, for years. And Mike," I turned to him, my fists clenched, "you've been smiling in my face all this time, knowing you were sleeping with my wife, raising my kids? What kind of man does that?" Mike finally spoke, his voice shaky, defensive. "Paul, it's not what it sounds like." "Oh, shut the hell up." I snapped, cutting him off. My chest heaved as I fought to keep control, every fiber of my being screaming to throw a punch. "Don't you dare insult me with excuses. Not after this." Emily, standing by, finally found her voice, though it was weak, hesitant. "Dad, please. Don't ruin this day." "Ruin this day?" I stared at her, my heart breaking all over again. "Ruin this day?" I repeated, the words dripping with disbelief. "Do you hear yourself, Emily? Your mother just told you, what? That this is all a joke? That I'm some kind of idiot for believing I had a real family? And you're worried about the wedding pictures being perfect?" She flinched, looking away. Jake and Ryan exchanged glances, clearly unsure of what to do. But it was Sarah who stepped forward, her arms crossed, her lips curling into a smirk that sent my blood boiling. "Paul," she said, her tone patronizing, "don't make a scene. We can talk about this later." I laughed then, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed through the hall. "Later? Later? No, Sarah. We're doing this right here, right now. Because guess what? I paid for this entire circus. So if anyone's making a scene, it's me." By now, the whispers had started. Guests were craning their necks, murmuring to one another, pretending not to eavesdrop. I didn't care. They could hear every sordid detail for all it mattered. My life was already in ruins, what was a little public humiliation on top of that? "Paul, stop it," Sarah hissed, her mask of control slipping for the first time. I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes, and for a moment, it felt like a victory. But it wasn't enough. Not after what she had done. Stop. Oh no, Sarah, I said, stepping closer. You don't get to dictate anything anymore. You don't get to tell me how to feel or what to do. You lost that right the second you decided to crawl into bed with him. I jabbed a finger in Mike's direction, who had now gone as pale as a ghost. Paul, let's go outside, Mike said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. We don't need to do this here. I turned on him so fast he actually flinched. Don't you dare tell me what I need to do, I snarled. You've already done enough. And then it hit me. Like a tidal wave, the enormity of it all crashed down around me. The years of lies, the moments I thought were real, the love I thought we shared, it was all fake. My knees nearly buckled under the weight of it, but I steadied myself, clinging to the last shreds of my dignity. Here's how this is going to go, I said, my voice steady now, deadly calm. The wedding? Cancelled. I'm not paying for another damn second of this sham. The kids? Out of my will. Let Mike take care of them if they're his. And you, Sarah? I turned to her, and for the first time, I saw fear flicker across her face. You're going to wish you had never underestimated me. She opened her mouth, probably to spit another lie, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned and walked away, my heart pounding with rage, pain, and something else, something that felt a lot like freedom. The whispers grew louder as I made my way out of the hall, the stunned faces of the guests blurring together. Behind me, Sarah called out my name, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Because this was far from over. As I stormed out of the wedding hall, the weight of betrayal turned into something far more dangerous, resolve. The cold November air hit my face, but it did nothing to cool the fire raging inside me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, Sarah's name lighting up the screen. I ignored it. She could scream and cry all she wanted, I wasn't about to listen to more of her lies. I leaned against my car, breathing hard, trying to think. But no matter how much I tried to focus, the voices inside kept swirling, Sarah's laughter, Emily's indifference, Ryan's smirk. And then Mike. Mike, the man who once pulled me out of a ditch in college after a bad night. Mike, who toasted at my wedding, calling me a brother for life. A brother, huh? That snake didn't just stab me in the back, he twisted the knife for 18 years. As I stood there, rage crackling in every nerve, I realized something, walking away wasn't enough. No, they needed to feel the weight of what they'd done. And not just Sarah and Mike. My ungrateful kids, too. They'd all played a part in this humiliation, and I'd be damned if I let any of them walk away unscathed. I drove home, my grip on the steering wheel tight enough to make my knuckles ache. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had already made my decision, this was war. I was going to dismantle everything they had taken for granted, piece by piece. Inside, the house was quiet. The wedding had been planned as an all-day event, and they wouldn't be back for hours, if Sarah even dared to show her face again. I poured myself a stiff drink and opened the safe in my office. There it was, every important document I had meticulously kept over the years. Bank accounts, trust funds, property deeds. Everything they thought they had access to. Not anymore. I sat down, laptop open, and started the process. First, I logged into the accounts I had set up for the kids. College savings, future investments, all tied neatly to my name. With a few clicks, I transferred everything into a separate account, locked under a new password. The funds were mine now, and they'd stay that way. Let them beg Mike for money if he was their real dad. Next was the house. It was in my name alone, a detail Sarah probably never cared about, assuming I'd never use it against her. I started drafting the paperwork to sell it. The market was hot, I could have it listed within days. They didn't know it yet, but they'd be out on the street before the month was over. I wasn't just stripping away their comforts. I was taking back control. For too long, I had been the fool who worked late hours to give them everything, while they laughed behind my back. Not anymore. By the time I was done, hours had passed. My phone buzzed again, this time, it was Emily. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. What? I said, my voice flat. Dad, she hesitated, her tone shaky. Mom said you left. Are you okay? Am I okay? I laughed bitterly. That's rich, coming from the girl who just stood there while her mother tore my life apart. What do you want, Emily? To convince me to come back and smile for the cameras? Her voice cracked. No. I didn't. I didn't know you were going to hear that. Oh, so you knew, I said, the realization hitting me like another punch to the gut. You knew this whole time and said nothing. Did Ryan and Jake know too? Is that why you all treat me like an ATM instead of a father? It's not like that, she protested. We didn't mean for you to find out like this. Uncle Mike just. Don't call him that, I snapped. He's not your uncle. He's a liar, just like your mother. And as far as I'm concerned, you're all strangers to me now. Dad, please, she pleaded. Don't do this. You're my father, no matter what. Funny how biology didn't matter to you until the money was at stake, I said coldly. Enjoy the wedding, Emily. It's the last thing I'm paying for. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking. The conversation didn't bring any relief, if anything, it deepened the pit of anger and sadness inside me. But I couldn't let it consume me. Not now. Not when I still had work to do. That night, I made one more call. It wasn't to Sarah, or Mike, or any of the kids. It was to my lawyer, Brian. Paul? Brian answered, his voice groggy. It was late, but I didn't care. What's going on? Everything okay? Far from it, I said. Listen, I need to meet with you first thing tomorrow. It's urgent. All right, he said, instantly awake. What's this about? My wife, I said. And my so-called best friend. It's a long story, but let's just say I'm going to need divorce papers. And maybe a restraining order. Brian hesitated. Are you sure you want to move that fast? I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said, the ice in my voice surprising even me. They've taken enough from me, Brian. It's time I take it all back. The morning after the wedding debacle dawned cold and gray, mirroring the storm still raging inside me. I had barely slept, the adrenaline from my discoveries keeping me awake. My mind raced with plans, scenarios, and, most of all, questions. How long had this been going on? How could they live under my roof, eat at my table, and share my life while treating me like a joke? When I arrived at Brian's office, he was already waiting, a cup of coffee steaming on his desk. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and gave me a long, appraising look. All right, Paul, he said. Let's hear it. I didn't sugarcoat a thing. I laid out every ugly detail, the overheard conversation, the texts I found, Sarah's laughter, and, most crushing of all, the revelation that my 3 children weren't even mine. By the time I finished, Brian's expression was a mixture of shock and barely concealed anger. Jesus, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. That's worse than I imagined. Yeah, I said, my voice flat. So what do we do? Brian didn't hesitate. First things first, we file for divorce. With everything you've told me, this will be a slam dunk. Adultery, fraud, it's all on your side. But there's one thing you need to decide, Paul. What's that? I asked. He leaned forward, his tone serious. How far are you willing to go? Because from what it sounds like, you want revenge. And that's a road that gets messy. You need to be sure you're ready for that. I met his gaze, my hands clenching into fists. Messy? Brian, they've been lying to me for 18 years. They've stolen my life from me. I'm beyond ready. By the time I left Brian's office, I had a plan. And not just any plan, a nuclear one. It was time to flip the script, to make them feel the weight of every lie they had told, every betrayal they had committed. But first, I needed to confront the one person who started it all, Sarah. When I arrived home, she was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone like it was just another day. The audacity of it made my blood boil. She looked up when I walked in, her expression shifting from surprise to wariness. Paul, she said, her tone cautious. You left the wedding. I've been trying to call you. I dropped my keys on the table, the sound sharp and deliberate. Yeah, I noticed. I wasn't in the mood to listen to more of your lies. She stood, crossing her arms defensively. What are you talking about? I barked a laugh, the sound bitter. Don't play dumb, Sarah. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I heard everything yesterday. The kids, the vasectomy, Mike. Everything. Her face paled, but to my disgust, she recovered quickly, her expression hardening. Paul, you're overreacting. It was a joke. A joke? I repeated, my voice rising. A joke? Are you seriously going to stand there and tell me that everything I heard, everything I saw, is just some twisted joke? Her jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. You don't understand, she began, but I cut her off. No, Sarah, I snapped. You don't understand. You don't get to gaslight me anymore. I know the truth. And now, it's your turn to hear what's going to happen. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand, silencing her. First, the wedding's done. Cancelled. I'm not paying another dime for something that's nothing more than a stage for your lies. Second, I've already pulled the kids' trust funds. Let Mike, their real father, handle it. Her eyes widened, and she took a step forward. Paul, you can't. Oh, I can, I interrupted, my voice cold as steel. And I already did. Third, this house. It's mine. And you have exactly 2 weeks to get out. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then her true colors came out. You're being petty, she snapped, her voice rising. You're punishing the kids because you can't handle the truth. Grow up, Paul. That was it. That was the moment the last shred of patience I had snapped. Petty? I shouted, stepping closer. You want to talk about petty, Sarah? How about lying to your husband for nearly 2 decades? How about sleeping with my best friend and laughing about it behind my back? How about letting me raise kids that aren't even mine while you use me as your personal bank account? Her face twisted in anger, and she took a step closer, jabbing a finger into my chest. You think you're some kind of victim? You're pathetic, Paul. You've always been pathetic. That's why I needed Mike, because at least he's a real man. The words hit me like a slap, but instead of crumbling, I stood taller. Thank you, I said, my voice icy. Thank you for finally telling the truth. It's about time. She looked taken aback, as if she expected me to break down. But I didn't. Instead, I walked past her, heading for the door. Pack your things, Sarah. Your time's up. I drove away from the house with a sense of calm determination, but underneath it, my anger simmered like a dormant volcano, ready to erupt. The confrontation with Sarah had gone exactly how I expected. She lied, deflected, and lashed out, playing the victim. But her words didn't cut me the way they used to. Not anymore. She'd already taken everything from me, and now it was my turn to take it all back. I didn't go far, just down the street to a diner where I could sit in a booth, drink bad coffee, and finalize the next steps of my plan. If Sarah thought the confrontation was the end of it, she was in for a rude awakening. I wasn't just walking away from this, I was burning the whole rotten structure to the ground. By the time I left the diner, I had made several calls. First, I hired a private investigator. Sure, I already knew about the affair, but I wanted everything: their history, their meetings, their financial entanglements, even a timeline of when this betrayal started. I wanted evidence so airtight that Sarah and Mike couldn't talk their way out of it. My PI, a no-nonsense woman named Carla, assured me she'd deliver within a week. Next, I called my realtor. The house was officially going on the market. I didn't even care where I ended up living for the time being. I just wanted to ensure that Sarah and the kids were out of my space, out of my life, and left scrambling to figure out how to support themselves. Finally, I placed a call to Mike's wife, Lisa. Hello? Lisa answered, her voice warm but tired. I knew her well. She was at every barbecue, every holiday party, every game night we hosted. She wasn't just Mike's wife, she had been a friend, too. And that made what I was about to say all the more painful. Lisa, it's Paul, I said, my voice steady. We need to talk. There was a pause on the line. Paul? Is everything okay? You sound serious. I am, I replied. I don't know how else to say this, so I'm just going to rip the bandage off. Mike's been having an affair with Sarah. My wife. And it's been going on for years. Silence. For a moment, I thought she had hung up. But then I heard her inhale sharply, her voice trembling. Are you sure? I wish I wasn't, I said. But I am. I've got texts, photos, and I've hired someone to gather even more proof. I thought you deserved to know. Her response was heartbreakingly quiet. Thank you, Paul. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, I assured her. Just know that you're not alone in this. And if you want, I can send you everything I have once it's all compiled. She thanked me, her voice breaking, and we ended the call. As I hung up, a pang of guilt twisted in my chest. Lisa didn't deserve this, just like I hadn't. But she needed to know the truth, and Mike deserved to face the consequences of his actions on both fronts. Over the next few days, the wheels were set in motion. Carla, the private investigator, worked fast, and her findings painted a picture even uglier than I imagined. The affair had started over a decade ago, when Sarah was pregnant with Ryan. Mike had been there every step of the way, playing the supportive friend, while secretly building a life with my wife behind my back. There were receipts for expensive gifts, hotel bookings, and even a hidden joint account where they had been funneling money, my money. I felt sick reading the reports, but the anger pushed me forward. I wasn't just fighting for revenge anymore, I was fighting to reclaim my dignity. Once I had everything I needed, I went back to Brian. The divorce paperwork was already in motion, but now we had ammunition. We were filing for infidelity, fraud, and financial misconduct. With the evidence Carla gathered, Sarah wouldn't just lose the divorce, she'd lose everything. The real fireworks started 2 weeks later. The kids had no idea the house was being sold until the realtor showed up for a walkthrough. Sarah was livid, screaming at me over the phone as if I had wronged her. You can't just sell the house, Paul. Where are we supposed to go? That's not my problem, I replied coldly. Talk to Mike. Maybe he can buy you a new place. It wasn't long before word of the affair spread. Small towns love gossip, and our community was no exception. Sarah couldn't go to the grocery store without someone whispering behind her back. Mike's business started losing clients, thanks to Lisa's own revenge, which involved emailing every one of his partners with the details of his betrayal. But the final blow came during the divorce proceedings. Sarah sat across from me, her lawyer looking grim as Brian laid out the evidence. Carla's report, bank statements, photos, it was all there, undeniable and damning. Sarah's confidence cracked as the reality of her situation sank in. She wasn't just losing me. She was losing the financial safety net she had taken for granted for years. When the judge ruled in my favor, granting me the majority of our assets and leaving Sarah with a pittance, I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. She had gambled with my life, and she lost. By the time it was all over, I was standing on the front lawn of the house I had once called home, watching as a moving truck pulled away with the last of Sarah's belongings. The kids had chosen to move in with her, for now. I wasn't surprised. They'd been conditioned to see me as nothing more than a provider. But someday, they'd understand the truth. As the sun set, I felt a strange sense of peace. The war was over. I had lost a lot, but I had gained something far more valuable, my freedom. The weeks following the court's decision were quiet, eerily so. After years of chaos, of working late nights to provide for a family that had been playing me for a fool, the silence was almost unnerving. I had sold the house, cut off financial ties to Sarah, and removed myself from their lives entirely. The fallout was no longer mine to manage. For the first time in years, I was living for myself. But rebuilding your life from ashes isn't as clean as people make it sound. I rented a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine, no shared memories, no reminders of what I'd lost. I bought new furniture, a new set of dishes, even a new coffee maker. Small changes, but each one felt like a step toward reclaiming my identity. The nights, though, were the hardest. Sitting alone in the living room, I couldn't help but replay everything. The wedding, the overheard conversation, the years of betrayal. It was like watching a bad movie on a loop, except this wasn't fiction, it was my life. And then there were the kids. Emily, Ryan, and Jake had sided with Sarah, of course. That didn't surprise me. She had years to manipulate them, to make me look like the bad guy. But knowing didn't make it hurt any less. The texts and calls I sent were met with silence, or worse, short, dismissive responses. Why are you doing this to Mom? Ryan texted me one night. The sheer audacity of the question made my blood boil. Why am I doing this? I replied. Ask her why she lied to me for 18 years. Ask her why she let me believe I was your father while laughing behind my back. When you're ready to hear the truth, you know where to find me. His response? Nothing. Just silence. One afternoon, weeks after Sarah had moved out, I got a call from Lisa. Her voice was calm but tinged with the same exhaustion I felt. Paul, can we meet? There's something I think you should know. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. Lisa looked tired, like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her eyes were red-rimmed, but she carried herself with a quiet strength that I couldn't help but admire. What's going on? I asked as we sat down. She hesitated, stirring her coffee before finally looking up at me. Mike's a mess, she said bluntly. After everything came out, he's been trying to fix things with me. Apologies, promises, the whole 9 yards. But, she paused, her lips tightening. He slipped up the other night. Said something about how Sarah wasn't his only affair. I leaned back, the words sinking in. What are you saying? Lisa sighed. I'm saying your wife isn't just a liar, she's a serial cheater. Mike admitted that there were others. Men she flirted with, maybe more. He didn't know how many, but he was sure he wasn't the first. The news didn't surprise me. At this point, nothing about Sarah could. But it still felt like another knife to the chest, a reminder that the woman I thought I loved had never existed. I thought you should know, Lisa said, her voice soft. I figured it might help, or at least make sense of some things. Thanks, I said, though the word felt hollow. What was I supposed to do with that information? I had already cut Sarah out of my life. Knowing she was worse than I thought didn't change anything. Or did it? The next day, I called Carla, the private investigator. I need you to look into something for me, I said. What now? She asked, her tone amused. Carla had grown used to my requests over the past few weeks. Sarah, I said simply. I want to know everything. Every affair, every secret. Leave no stone unturned. Carla chuckled. You're relentless, Paul. I like that. Give me a week. While Carla dug into Sarah's past, I focused on moving forward. I started going to the gym, not just to burn off the anger but to rebuild myself physically. The routine helped. So did therapy, though I had been reluctant to go at first. Talking to a stranger about my feelings seemed ridiculous, but as the sessions went on, I realized how much I needed it. I wasn't just grieving the loss of my marriage, I was grieving the loss of the life I thought I had. One day, during a session, my therapist said something that stuck with me. Paul, you've been living for other people your entire life. Your wife, your kids, your friends. But now? Now you get to live for yourself. What do you want? The question haunted me. What did I want? For so long, my identity had been wrapped up in being a provider, a husband, a father. Stripped of all that, I didn't know who I was anymore. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe it was a chance to figure it out. A week later, Carla called. You're gonna want to sit down for this, she said. When we met, she handed me a thick folder. Inside were pages of evidence, photos, receipts, emails. Sarah's web of lies was bigger than I could have imagined. There were at least 3 other men, dating back almost to the beginning of our marriage. One of them was a coworker, another a neighbor. And the third? A mutual friend from our church. I felt a strange sense of calm as I flipped through the folder. The anger, the pain, it was all still there, but it was muted now, buried under a growing resolve. Thanks, Carla, I said as I closed the folder. You've done more than I could have asked for. What are you going to do with it? She asked, curious. I smiled, the first genuine smile in weeks. Something she won't see coming. The day of reckoning was here, and I was more prepared than I'd ever been. The thick folder Carla had handed me was now my weapon of choice, a collection of Sarah's lies, her tangled web of deceit, and all the proof I needed to ensure she'd never recover from this. I wasn't planning something petty or impulsive. No, this was calculated. Every move, every step, designed to dismantle Sarah's life and Mike's along with it. They thought they could destroy me and walk away unscathed. They thought I'd just disappear quietly. They were wrong. The first strike came at Sarah's workplace. She was a mid-level manager at a local nonprofit, ironic, considering the selfish life she led outside of work. I emailed her boss directly, attaching a carefully selected portion of Carla's report. Nothing too scandalous, just enough to show Sarah's character for what it truly was. Affairs with coworkers, falsified sick days for meetings, and even a couple of questionable expenses billed to the company card. The response was swift. Within days, Sarah's position was eliminated, and she was left scrambling. I didn't stop to feel sorry for her. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. Next was Mike. His business, a small marketing firm, relied heavily on his reputation in the community. So, I compiled everything: the affair with Sarah, the years of deception, and, thanks to Lisa, a few damning details about unethical practices within his company. Lisa had found emails showing Mike offering special favors to clients in exchange for contracts. She wanted revenge just as much as I did, and together, we made sure the information landed in the right hands. Within a week, Mike lost his two biggest clients. Word spread fast, and before long, his company was on the verge of collapse. I didn't feel an ounce of regret. He had stolen my family, my life, and now I was watching him lose everything. But the real masterpiece came at the family level. I wasn't going to let Sarah and Mike's betrayal poison my relationship with the kids forever. They were angry at me for selling the house, for cutting off the trust funds, for everything. But they didn't know the full truth. It was time to change that. I invited all three of them, Emily, Ryan, and Jake, to dinner. Neutral ground, at a quiet restaurant where they couldn't storm out easily. They showed up reluctantly, their faces cold and guarded. Emily was the first to speak as we sat down. "What's this about, Dad?" I took a deep breath, pulling out the folder. "I need to tell you the truth," I said, my voice steady. "Not the version your mother has spun, but the real truth. About her, about Mike, and about everything you think you know." Ryan rolled his eyes. "Oh, here we go again. More excuses to make Mom look bad." "Just listen," I said firmly, placing the folder on the table. "Then you can make up your own minds." They didn't have a choice. I laid it all out, the timeline of the affair, the text messages, the secret bank account. The evidence Carla had uncovered, showing that Sarah had cheated not just with Mike, but with other men. And finally, the part that hit them the hardest, the fact that Mike, not me, was their biological father. The silence was deafening. Emily's face turned white as she flipped through the pages. Ryan stared at the floor, his jaw clenched. Jake, the youngest, looked like he was about to cry. "I didn't want to tell you like this," I said softly. "But you've been blaming me for things I didn't do. I've been the one raising you, supporting you, loving you, while your mother lied to all of us. I'm not perfect, but I deserved better. And so did you." Emily was the first to speak. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You're saying Mike's our dad?" I nodded. "Biologically, yes. But I was the one who stayed. I was the one who showed up every day. And I'm still here, even after everything." Ryan finally looked up, anger flashing in his eyes. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" "Because I didn't know," I admitted. "Not until the wedding. And even then, I needed proof before I could tell you." Jake shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "So Mom, she knew? She lied to us too?" "Yes," I said simply. "She lied to all of us." They sat there, absorbing the truth, their emotions raw and visible. I didn't push them. I let the silence stretch, giving them the space to process. Finally, Emily spoke again, her voice trembling. "I need time to think." "I understand," I said. "Take all the time you need. But know this, I'm still your dad, no matter what biology says. And I'll always be here for you." In the days that followed, the fallout rippled through our family. Emily, Ryan, and Jake started asking questions Sarah couldn't answer without incriminating herself. Slowly but surely, the cracks in her narrative began to show. The kids didn't come running back to me overnight, but the ice started to thaw. I could see it in their messages, their cautious attempts to rebuild a bridge that had been burned. As for Sarah, her life was in freefall. She had lost her job, her house, her reputation. Mike wasn't much better, his business was hanging by a thread, and Lisa had filed for divorce, taking him for everything she could. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Not because I had destroyed their lives, though, let's be honest, that was satisfying, but because I had finally taken back control of mine. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind the wreckage of a life I once thought was unshakable. Sarah and Mike were out of my life, their worlds crumbling under the weight of their own decisions. The kids, while still distant, were beginning to see the truth, their messages slowly turning from cold accusations to tentative questions. And me? For the first time in years, I was free. Free to start over, free to rebuild, free to live for myself. It started with small changes. I stopped wearing the suits and ties that had defined me for years as the provider. Instead, I dressed how I wanted, comfortable jeans, simple shirts, things that felt like me. I started cooking for myself, learning recipes I'd never had time for. It wasn't just about food, it was about reclaiming the parts of my life I had handed over to Sarah and the demands of a family that had never truly been mine. Therapy became a cornerstone of my recovery. Each session peeled back another layer of the pain and betrayal, helping me see how I had been conditioned to put everyone else first, even at the cost of my own happiness. My therapist, a sharp, empathetic woman named Dr. Klein, pushed me to ask hard questions. "What do you want your life to look like now, Paul?" she asked during one session. "What's your vision?" At first, I didn't know how to answer. My life had always been about others, Sarah, the kids, the idea of being a husband and father. But as I sat there, the answer began to take shape. "I want peace," I said finally. "And I want to feel like I'm enough. For myself." "That's a good start," she said with a smile. "Now let's figure out how to get you there." One of the most surprising changes came with the kids. After our dinner, Emily reached out first. She asked to meet for coffee, and while she was still guarded, it was clear she was trying to make sense of everything. She apologized for how she'd treated me, admitting that she had been blinded by Sarah's version of events. "I don't know how to fix this," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "But I want to try." That was all I needed to hear. "We'll figure it out," I told her. One step at a time. Ryan followed suit a week later, though his approach was more blunt. "I'm still pissed," he said when we met at a diner. "But not at you. At Mom. At Mike. At everything." "That's fair," I said. "You've been lied to just as much as I have. But you're not alone, Ryan. We'll get through this." Jake, the youngest, was the hardest to reach. He was angry and confused, his world shaken to its core. But I didn't give up. I kept sending texts, checking in, letting him know I was there. And slowly, he began to respond. Meanwhile, Sarah and Mike's downward spiral continued. I heard through mutual friends that Sarah had moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, struggling to find a new job. Mike's business officially folded a month after I exposed his unethical practices, leaving him scrambling to rebuild his life. Lisa, his now ex-wife, had taken him to court and won a sizable settlement, leaving him with little more than his bruised ego. It wasn't schadenfreude that made me feel better, it was the knowledge that justice, in its own way, had been served. They had gambled with other people's lives, and they lost. Now, they were paying the price. As the months passed, I began to discover who I was outside of the roles I had been forced into. I picked up new hobbies, woodworking, hiking, even a little photography. It wasn't about filling the time, it was about rediscovering joy, something I hadn't felt in years. I also reconnected with old friends, people I had drifted away from during the years I spent buried under Sarah's demands and the weight of a fake family. They welcomed me back with open arms, and their support reminded me that I wasn't as alone as I had felt during those dark weeks after the wedding. The most unexpected development came about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. I was hiking a nearby trail when I ran into a woman named Claire, a teacher who had recently moved to the area. She was kind, funny, and completely uninterested in the drama of my past. We started meeting up for hikes, then coffee, and eventually dinner. I didn't rush anything, I wasn't ready for a serious relationship, but her presence in my life was a reminder that not everyone was out to take advantage of me. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset over the hills, Claire asked me, "Do you ever think about what happened? With Sarah, I mean." "All the time," I admitted. "But not in the way I used to. It's like a scar now, something that's there, but it doesn't hurt anymore. She smiled, resting her hand on mine. Sounds like you've come a long way. I have, I said. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. Looking back, I realized that Sarah and Mike's betrayal, as devastating as it was, had forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding for years, myself. I had spent so much time trying to be the perfect husband, the perfect father, that I'd lost sight of who I was. Losing them wasn't the end of my life, it was the beginning of a new one. If there's one piece of advice I'd give to anyone facing betrayal, it's this: don't let it define you. Use it. Learn from it. And when the time comes, let it go. Because the best revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you, it's building a life so good, they'll wish they hadn't.